Rigathi Gachagua has demanded Eldoret airstrip CCTV as questions mount over Johana Ngeno's chopper crash. The former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua has reignited the debate over the death of Emurua Dikir, a Member of Parliament whose deceased Johana Ngeno, demanding that CCTV footage from the Eldoret airstrip be released as pressure grows for a fresh and independent inquiry into the February helicopter crash. Gachagua made the demand after raising questions about what happened when the helicopter stopped at the Eldoret airstrip for refueling on the day of this tragedy. He has now gone further, calling for an independent investigation by Scotland Yard or the FBI, arguing that Kenyans deserve definitive answers about what caused the aircraft to crash and whether everything that happened before its final flight has been properly investigated. The renewed controversy centers on February 28, 2026. That afternoon, Johana Ngeno was traveling in an Airbus H125 helicopter registration 5Y DSB, which had earlier flown from Wilson Airport and made several stops, including Mararianta and Endebess. After dropping Ngeno at Endebess, the aircraft traveled to Eldoret airstrip. It is what Gachagua says happened at the airstrip that has now become the focus of his questions. According to Gachagua, he has intelligence suggesting that the helicopter was refueled with fuel that had allegedly been transported from Lodwar and possibly adulterated. He claimed that a vehicle suspected of carrying the fuel was detected by Kenya Revenue Authority officials at Eldoret airstrip and that its driver was questioned. Gachagua further alleged that the driver was subsequently released after officials at the airstrip allegedly received instructions from Nairobi. Those claims have not been independently established, and Gachagua has not publicly produced the evidence behind the intelligence he says he received. But he says the questions are too serious to simply dismiss. The former deputy president has specifically challenged authorities to release CCTV footage from Eldoret airstrip. His argument is straightforward. If cameras captured the helicopter's arrival, the refueling operation, the vehicles present, and the people who interacted with the aircraft, and what happened immediately before the helicopter departed, that footage could help investigators reconstruct the events surrounding the aircraft's stop. Gachagua has also questioned whether the alleged fuel could have affected the helicopter's ability to gain altitude. He has pointed to the aircraft's subsequent emergency landing and its final attempt to take off as events, in his view, require closer examination. But there is another important part of the story. From the beginning, investigators have also focused heavily on weather and visibility. The helicopter encountered deteriorating weather conditions during its final journey. According to the flight timeline released by the Ministry of Roads and Transport, the aircraft made an emergency landing at Dabolwa at about 4:20 in the afternoon because of poor weather. The pilot briefly interacted with people on the ground before taking off again at approximately 4:25 p.m. About 1 minute later, air traffic control lost contact with the aircraft. The helicopter subsequently crashed at Chepkiep in Mosop, Nandi County, killing all 6 people on board. Early investigation findings reported in March pointed to fog, rain, and severely reduced visibility as major factors in the incident. That preliminary picture is now being challenged by the new questions surrounding the Eldoret refueling stop, and this is where the demand for CCTV becomes significant. Aviation investigators do not normally determine the cause of a crash from one piece of evidence alone. They examine the wreckage, flight data, maintenance records, weather conditions, pilot's actions, fuel, mechanical systems, communications, and the aircraft's movements before the accident. Indeed, crucial components recovered from the wreckage were taken abroad for further technical analysis, while the final investigation was expected to take considerably longer than the initial preliminary stage. That means CCTV from Eldoret, if it exists and remains available, could potentially become another piece of evidence rather than a replacement for the aviation investigation. The tragedy claimed the lives of Ngeno and 5 others. The former MP was serving his 3rd term in parliament. His death shocked the political establishment and triggered immediate calls for a proper investigation. At the time, the government announced that the Aircraft Accident Investigation Department could lead the investigation in accordance with aviation regulations rather than the ordinary criminal investigation process. The authorities said a preliminary report could be expected within 30 days, while aviation rules provide for a much longer period for a final report. 4 months later, questions surrounding the crash have resurfaced, and Gachagua is not the only person who has previously questioned the circumstances. Human rights activists and presidential candidate Boniface Mwangi raised concerns shortly after the crash, arguing that Kenya's history of political killings made it necessary to examine whether the tragedy was purely accidental or whether there could have been something more sinister behind it. The political temperature has now risen even further. Gachagua's latest demand for an independent investigation brings the issue back into the national spotlight at a time when he is openly challenging the Ruto administration. Government officials, however, have pushed back against his allegations. Interior Cabinet Secretary Kipchumba Murkomen accused Gachagua of making unsubstantiated claims and demanded that if he possesses intelligence concerning the crash, he should provide it to the investigators rather than make the allegations publicly. That response has created another question for the public. Should the government simply wait for the existing aviation investigation to conclude, or should the latest allegations about the fuel, the alleged release of a driver, and the CCTV footage at the Eldoret airstrip be independently examined? For the family of Johana Ngeno, the issue goes beyond politics. They want to know what happened to their loved one. And for the wider public, the question is whether the official explanation will ultimately account for every stage of that final journey, from Endebess to Eldoret, to the emergency landing at Dabolwa, and finally to the devastating crash at Chepkiep. For now, there is no verified evidence establishing that contaminated or adulterated fuel caused the crash. There is also no publicly established evidence proving that the tragedy was deliberately engineered. Those remain allegations and questions, but Gachagua's demand for the Eldoret airstrip CCTV has introduced a new piece of evidence in case that many Kenyans thought had already faded from the headlines. The central question now is simple. What exactly happened at Eldoret airstrip before Johana Ngeno's helicopter took its final flight? And if CCTV footage exists, Kenyans may soon be asking an even bigger question: why has that footage not yet been made public?